Welcome everyone to the Scrum Master Summit 2022. My name is Martin von Weissenberg, and I'm the track chair of the Scaling Scrum track. And today we have with us here Eagan Rackley. Welcome.
Hello, Martin. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's so fun to have you here. It's been a pleasure talking to you previously, and you have so many things to tell. And you're such a great match for this scaling track because you have a different perspective. It's not about scaling the company as such. It's about scaling the manager, right? Basically,
totally.
how to.
That's a great description of my interest in management. Not to say I'm like a narcissist. I'm only thinking about myself. It's about scaling the team and as well. But yeah, that's definitely something I see it as a track of personal and professional growth.
Yes, as it should be. I mean, the moment you stop growing as a professional is the moment when you need to think about life, I believe. So you've been working at the same company for quite a while, and you were an early employee. You were employee number 19. And now the company has more than 800 employees, and you've gone through a cultural journey. And as a company, but also you as an individual, as a colleague in that company, you've gone through a bit of a journey, and you're still on that journey, I suppose. But tell us a little bit, how did you end up there? What have you learned? Where are you today? Tell us.
Sure. Yeah. So you know, I came to this company from I live in Ohio. My first time getting a remote job, which I was just crazy excited about. I still am actually, in California. And I remember that when I got the job, my wife didn't believe it was a real place because we looked it up, the address on Google Maps, and the office was so new that on Google Maps, they still just had trees where the office should be. And so it was kind of nerve-wracking going out there because they were a teeny tiny company. I was, the 19th employee, and what's so crazy about it is when you show up as the 19th employee, the culture is so different as a company grows. It has to be, and you know everyone's name, and you know what everyone does, and you kind of talk to everyone on a regular basis. And now that we're 800 plus people, I know this teeny little subsection of the company, that focuses on the engineering work that we do, and maybe the product and development growth and a little bit of marketing. So it's definitely been very interesting to see how we've grown and how that culture has changed, and sometimes changed in good ways and sometimes changed in ways that could be improved. And it's definitely been an interesting journey.
Yeah, I believe you. What's been your greatest influences, basically, when you think about your own career path within the company? What's been the greatest influences on that? What have you learned most from?
I mean, obviously failure, right? I especially becoming a manager, we've had some projects succeed and we've had some projects fail. So I have to give credit to failure as my biggest influence, because I think that's just the best way for us to learn and grow, even if it's the most uncomfortable. As far as individuals who influenced me, there were three managers. I don't know if I should call them out by name or not in an interview, but I'll call them out by name. Mark Patton, Mike Malone, and Stan Morrow. And when they came onto the company, we had just finished, kind of for my team, what I saw as the first big failure. It was still a commercial. We still did fine commercially, but personally, I didn't feel good about the project. We had ended up in a death march. It was kind of a failure of this hybrid waterfall agile system that we had. And these guys came in and they completely changed the engineering organization. They made it predictable. We had great sprinting traditions, retrospectives every sprint, Scrum masters involved, and one thing that really struck me about them is that they really got to know the strengths and weaknesses of each team member and use those strengths and weaknesses to give them purpose on the team. And that was the first time I had lost all my mojo when this project failed. And working with them was an opportunity for me to build up that mojo and not only see that, but see what I wanted to be, what I could be, and to want to do that for other people. And then the next influence was Washko Duarte came to work at our company, and that was like I don't know what the equivalence would be. It was like walking into the Enlightenment twice. When these guys came out, I was like, this is how things could work. And then when Washko came in, it was like my mind was blown. I was like, wait, it gets better? You know, there's so much more you can do here, and so much more growth personally and professionally. And I got really excited about that. And so Washko helped us set up an experimentation team and really build a culture of experimentation on my team. So we had this scrappy little experimentation team of about 3 people. And we were doing it on the side. I'm never the kind of engineer you'd hear talk about money very often. I'm really more interested in the craft and the science of engineering. But this scrappy little team just kind of doing this as a side project pulled in $1 million over the next year just by doing things like, well, let's move this button up here and see what happens. And let's change the text of this button to instead of quarantine, clean up threats, something like that. And so it was really great to sort of see how experimentation can change a product. And then that moved into, hey, every sprint, what's our experiment? What are we changing? What little shift are we making to sort of get toward, the local optimum?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's and for that you need very rapid feedback loops, right? And you also need a way of measuring or a way of kind of figuring out, are we actually doing better? So you need to actually look at the numbers and be kind of empirical about things.
Yeah, exactly. What are our expectations? What is the data we gather? How often do we want to evaluate this little experiment?
So this kind of openness and transparency, when it comes to product development, you can use numbers and metrics and generally kind of being open and transparent. How does that also translate into leadership and management? What do you do as a manager to keep things open and transparent?
Right. I mean, so probably one of the most uncomfortable things for me about being a manager is being transparent with my managers, right? I mean, everybody wants to succeed. I came into management as a little bit of a people pleaser. And so, the first thing I had to learn that was difficult was saying no. And that it's okay to say no, and your managers actually benefit from you saying no if something's not going to work out. And that's a challenge for someone who likes to say yes to everything. But also that being transparent with your managers, even though it's uncomfortable, and your leadership and your stakeholders is the most important tool for communication with them and success, right? If you're totally open and transparent, you're sharing your learnings and your metrics with them, they are informed to make the best decisions on their side. And that goes 2 ways. It's the same with the team. I, as far as possible, like to be open and honest with them about our goals and where we're at and how we're doing. And, that has to be maintained through a regular process of one-on-one communication and team communication, team bonding, things like that.
And you mentioned, or you said as far as possible. So there are kind of limits for how far you can go, obviously. But within that, I think it helps a lot to be transparent.
Yeah. Right. Yes. I mean, you don't want to be open and transparent about something that will hurt the team or hurt their morale. And that's your job as a manager, is to shelter them from the insanity that might go on above you. I had a manager once who said, Eagan, your job as a manager is taking out the trash for everybody, for the team. And I think that's, it's kind of, you do the chores so that they can do the creative work.
Yes, I agree. So that's I think you summed up now the definition of a servant manager, basically, servant leader. So you make it possible for your people or the people that you are serving to do a good job, to do the best job that they can. And if it involves actually, taking out the trash, kind of literally, then that's
right. If that's what we need, I have actually done that before. That's what we do.
Yeah. Is that something that you got? You mentioned the three managers that served as role models for you. Yeah. So and that's also another thing that's worth highlighting. If you can observe good and skilled people at work and talk to them, see the choices they are making and the choices they are not making or choosing not to do, and generally kind of picking up. That's regardless of what skills we are talking about. Might be management or leadership, might be something totally different. That's such a great way of just vacuuming up a lot of good practices and good approaches and thinking models and so on, including taking out the trash for your team if you need so.
Right. Yeah.
So I just
Absolutely.
wanted to tie back there to the role models that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think having a role model or a mentor as a manager is so important. Management, engineering has so many principles that work every time, and then if you don't have principles, you have patterns. And you have that in management too, but at least for me, I found it very challenging to implement it without a feedback loop. To sort of, because I think Jurgen Appelo calls it a complex system, right? People management, and so maybe software is complicated, and this is really complex. And so when you're solving a complex system, having that mentor, having someone with experience look at the decisions you're making and helping you grow is just as important as you helping your team grow.
Yeah. I totally agree that a team and organization is a complex system. There's good reasons for that. One is that people are not identical. I mean, you take two senior software engineers and compare them, and from a hierarchical perspective, from an HR perspective, these people are all they fit in the one box that says senior software engineer, right? But they are different. They have different backgrounds. They are different personalities and so on. And also the connections between people. That's where some people get along great and others can stand each other. And that's what makes it complex. So how do you know that information is flowing from person A to person B? They are not talking to each other. Maybe there's person C in between who makes sure that things are or trickle feeds information to. There's so many,
Yeah, absolutely. I think understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each person and their personalities and how they connect is essential to being able to run a healthy team.
Yes, exactly. So, and it's somehow easy to pick out the problems. We talked previously about the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. It might be a manager or a high profile, the alpha engineer who is rushing around and fixing things and so on, firefighter style. It might be the complainer who is always saying, I'm never going to work, and this kind of stuff. So tell me a little bit about that. So how do you
Sure. So I mean, I think when I think of squeaky wheels or even an alpha engineer rushing from A to B to C to get things done, I think about people reacting to events, right? There's events happening in their lives and at work, and they're reacting to these. And when I think of a squeaky wheel, I think of someone blaming, right? Like that's definitely, we're all working very hard. Pressure is usually pretty high. Eventually people start pointing fingers. And when people start blaming, and I think I'm quoting Esther Derby here, who is probably like, if this is probably a terrible way to put this, but if Agile coaches were spirit animals, Esther Derby would be mine. Okay, that was terrible. Can you cut that? Anyway, I love her work, and it really resonates with me. And I think that something she said is, if there's blame, that's usually a symptom of people not understanding the system or the pattern they're in. So it's not just necessarily being transparent with your managers, but it's also, let's look at the pattern of events that have occurred over time and see how that's influencing this behavior. And then once we can see the system, people no longer need to point fingers. They can start thinking about how we change that system.
Exactly. And as a manager, you're kind of balancing constantly between managing the system and also leading individuals. So you're working both with the each individual and in the system, and they are all different. We're all, again, reminds me of the scene from the Monty Python movie. You're all different. I'm not. And and so on. Anyway, so what I wanted to say is that you have this is kind of a paradox in it. You need to work with the system, but you also need to work with all the individuals that make up that great system. So
Absolutely.
what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think that that's the most complex part, right? And as a manager, that's really been a journey for me. I think I told you I'm a little bit of a people pleaser, and definitely have always carried a little bit of imposter syndrome with me as I've gone through my job, and never more so than when I started being a manager. And one of the first challenges I had to deal with is I got this brilliant team member who intimidated me, and like it was an imposter syndrome trigger, and I think that as a manager, when you're dealing with these complex systems and personalities and people, I'm just going to say this for all the other people who have imposter syndrome out there, is that you have to get really comfortable just kind of being an idiot in front of other people. Just oh, I said something really dumb there, and it's actually been really good for my sense of imposter syndrome, because I got very comfortable just making mistakes and realizing that's okay to make mistakes. In fact, everybody else is out there making the same volume of mistakes probably that you are. It's just that you really see them personally. So I think that when you're managing people and personalities, being comfortable with yourself is probably the most important place to start. Yes. And then once you're comfortable with yourself, then you can really start to see them and what they value and what's important to them. And of course, communication is going to really play a role in understanding them. And I really love using as a tool open-ended questions to facilitate thought and communication with my team, so that we can learn more about each other and how we grow.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I was just thinking back to the feedback loop that we mentioned previously, and also kind of the willingness to take a failure bow, basically, and say, sorry, I screwed up. And it just reminded me that there are, in so many situations, there is actually a Control Z button. And you can hit that one, you can say, oh, sorry, I probably should have used that analogy about spirit animals. And people forgive you, and they don't think about it, and then you just move on. As an aside, I found it hilarious.
That's a perfect example, and I think that spirit animal thing, before I became a manager, I really would have had a neurotic about that, like, why did I say that? Oh, and now my experience of being a manager has now allowed me to say, like, you're welcome. There's a stupid thing I said, and move on.
Yeah. Let's laugh a little bit and then move on. Exactly. But I like to call it, or think about it, as a Control Z button. And it is there. People are very often, they are willing to take a step back and kind of just, forget the last 15 or 20 seconds and then move on, because it's really actually not that important. And for people, I also suffer a little bit from imposter syndrome. And I found that, like you, making mistakes and then saying, sorry guys, I messed up big time, and then moving on.
I think as an engineer, you see your managers and they're experienced and they have a lot of knowledge, and you start to think, these guys don't make mistakes. It's really more so if you have that really good engineering manager, it's just that they made all their mistakes before you joined their team. And I think that I don't know, I think I'm doing it again. This is like the spirit animal comment. Let's just move on.
No, I think that was interesting. So how, basically, when you screw up big time, then so how do you handle that? I have a kind of a strategy for that, but do you have a strategy for screwing up when you screw up big time? I do sometimes screw up big time. So
sure. I mean, I think that as a person who has ADHD, you learn the art of the mea culpa really early. And I think a mea culpa is really important to sort of say, like, hey, this is how I contributed to this problem. And then I think it's really important to say, and here's what I'm going to do. I mean, I think that everybody knows, especially leadership, knows that people make mistakes, right? And sometimes they make big mistakes. And I think that my strategy normally is to come up with a strategy, acknowledge the way I contribute to the problem, think about how I might be part of a bigger pattern, and then come up with some solutions for how we might solve that. And it depends, like, how we might solve it as a team, how we might solve it as my relationship to my stakeholders. and then put a plan in action, and then learn from it, right? Measure it. How are we going to measure whether or not we fix this, and etc. But I try to make it a collaborative, acknowledgement that yes, this was a mistake, and we can do something about it.
Yes, there are managers who make mistakes that are on the order of tens of millions or even hundreds of millions. So, and that's starting to be a lot. But even if you screw up that way, I think everyone is allowed to take a couple of days of kind of smacking themselves on the head and going like, why did I do that? But then at some point you need to basically sharpen up and move ahead and have a plan or think about how can we fix things now, and how can we change the system so it doesn't really happen in the future. And if when you make a small mistake, that's something you do in 15, 20 seconds, and then you forget all about it. But when you make a big one, then I think it might actually take a couple of days sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about making space for feeling bad after you make a mistake.
Yeah,
that's okay.
It's totally okay. There was something I wanted to talk about. So basically, when you work with a team, we've touched on the idea of looking at the team as a system, as a complex system, and as a manager, you're working. You need to know your people and take an interest in them, but you also have the big system in place, and you need to think about how to nudge it or how to change it, and how do we get more of that kind of stuff. How do I, as a servant leader, I need to help my people get good stuff done, right? So the question then becomes, how do I set up a system how do I change the system over time so that more good stuff is happening? It has to do, I suppose, with rewarding the team as a whole, maybe motivating people, helping them do things in a specific way.
And that's kind of your job, right? Is to look for opportunities to do that. And I know you and I have spoken about intrinsic and extrinsic value in the past, right? And intrinsic being the value that you get from your work, and extrinsic being a reward. And one story that comes to mind is we had this bugathon at work, and it was dropped right in the middle of a sprint. It was sort of disruptive, and the team was there were going to be prizes, but the stakeholders were too busy to figure out what the prizes were yet. So it's like the team doesn't know why they're doing this. It's disrupted the other goals they're trying to deliver. And so I kind of had this dropped in my lap, like, hey, next week you need to run this 3-day bugathon. You have to get this many bugs done. And I was thinking, I was listening to the team sort of like discouragement about it, and they thought it was going to be this big thing. And so that weekend I sort of sat around and talked to my wife about it, and realized, like, well, we don't have to have big prizes from the management. Maybe we can invent something for ourselves that could turn this around and make it really exciting. And I remember that we came up with several ideas that I implemented next week for extrinsic prizes for the situation. And one of them, I think, was if we got to a certain level of bugs being delivered, we'd pay this guy to read a poem to a tree. And another one was that, the big prize was that I would sponsor a miniature donkey at this miniature donkey rescue for an entire year. And these were kind of, small, little, tiny things that got the team really excited. It was silly. It was fun. And every day during the bugathon, I'd say, hey, here's our status. I made a donkey-o-meter, that sort of said, like, how close we were to getting the donkey. And, that made it really fun. And it turned a situation that could have been something that the team felt like begrudging about to something they became excited about and engaged in. And we blew past our goals as far as delivering on defects. I think we did all but just a handful. And it was something like 80 to 100, defects that we wanted to take care of.
Wow. So I find that super enlightening. I mean, these are simple things, and they are also cheap. I don't know how much it costs to sponsor a donkey, but reading a poem to a tree, that's basically...
Very right.
I can do it for free,
Right. Right. And so, I realized at that moment that there are simple extrinsic ways that you can bring engagement and excitement to a team, and all you have to do is be a little creative. And not only that, you can ask them for their creative ideas, and they often bring a lot to the table too, and their ideas are often better than mine.
Yeah, and that's another thing. You're touching now on yet another thing of being a manager, which is basically that your ideas are not necessarily the best ones.
Right. You have a team of people who are as smart or smarter than you. And so why not utilize that? And so I know that's an agile principle. You bring business problems to the team. You don't give them prescriptive solutions. And I like to use that same philosophy with sort of how we grow and build our team. I'll have an idea for where I want us to go. But normally when I bring that idea and encourage them toward it, they go in a different direction that's often better than what the idea has.
Yes, and a good manager recognizes that and recognizes how to, or knows how to elicit good ideas from a team and picking them up and helping the team make them real.
Yeah.
Great. You know what? I think we are coming to an end of our little time box, but I wanted to sum up. So we have talked about the importance of making mistakes and having that feedback loop and not getting bogged down in those mistakes, which is what people with imposter syndrome so easily do. We've talked about looking at the team as a complex system. So where actually individuals are important and also the connections between individuals, but you also need to think about the whole system and how to make it work, how to put constraints and in place, how to make it attractive for people to get good stuff done. We talked about openness and transparency, and we talked also about the squeaky wheels and complaints and how to handle that a little bit and how to motivate and reward teams. And you can do that, it turns out, in very, I hate to call it inexpensive ways, but you can do it in ways that tickle people's fancy, and they don't need to cost a lot of money. I wanted to ask you, do you have any favorite kind of book or something? Where should people, what should people pick up now if somebody, let's say, they want to become a manager or embark on the same career path as you have taken?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll speak to sort of like the sensitive people out there who maybe have ADHD and imposter syndrome too. Sometimes a sensitive person can be a really great facilitator, and that might be a great way to step into management. So when I think about facilitation, we don't have Scrum Masters at my current company, which is kind of an anti-pattern that I play the role of manager and Scrum Master for the team. But I think about retrospectives and how valuable they are for us, and that was very influential when I read Esther Derby's, I think it's Agile Retrospectives, Making Team Great. That is one of her books that had a big influence on how I set up communication on my team. And then, another one that's just been hugely influential to me is obviously the Scrum Master Toolbox by Vasco Duarte. I listen to that every day, and there's always some idea that I carry into me with work. I do it on my morning walk, and then I usually have some new idea that I bring to work. So those are two of my favorites. I have a whole list, but we'll stop there.
Yeah, those are both great. Those are both classics. So the Retrospectives book, and actually companies I talk with, the ones that are successful, they say that one thing they are never going to give up are the retrospectives.
Yeah.
And then
absolutely my favorite part of my job.
Yeah. And then the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, short bites of so important information. So that's another one to follow. Great. So that's two things that people can do straight away, is to get hold of the book and then start listening to Vasco's podcasts. Anything else? What can a budding manager or somebody who wants to become a team leader or a department leader, what can they do tomorrow?
Right. I mean, I think, one of the most important things is making sure that, if you do have imposter syndrome, that you're doing something to address it and learn that, you deliver value to a team. That's why you're at a company. And another book that was hugely influential to me is sort of thinking about complex systems and constraints and how do we improve as a team was Management 3.0 by Jurgen Appelo. That one definitely has been a big impact. It's one of those ones where it's on my shelf, and whenever I feel like things aren't going well, I usually get it down and flip through it and say like, oh, I'm not doing this again, and it's I'm constantly relearning the same lessons. I think about it like an eagle flying into land. It's sort of like management is oh, I've made this mistake again, but every time you make it, you're doing it a little better, and so it's definitely one of those ones that I come back to again and again.
Yeah, Jurgen is great at popularizing stuff, writing it down in a way that people kind of come back to time and time again. He's great. It's a bit of a paradox because he's good at making it and explaining it, but then again, people come back to the book again and again. Did they get it the first time, right?
Right. I think part of that's just individual and how you learn. That's how I learned.
Probably. Thanks. Thank you, Eagan. Our time is coming to an end for this interview. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was really fun getting to speak with you about this.
Yes, it was. Thank you very much. So, everyone, this is the Scaling Scrum track in the Scrum Master Summit 2022. Super happy to have had the opportunity now to have this interview with Eagan. And thank you very much, everyone.